Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse, host of the Bible Forum, here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on thebibleforum.net. This evening is July 5th. We're celebrating the 4th of July, and I wrote a blog. You can read it at thebibleforum.net, entitled Happy Birthday, America. America celebrates their 239th birthday this year. The document was approved on July 2nd with 12 affirmative votes and 1 abstention. New York abstained. New York was currently under siege from the British Navy, but 9 days later they did vote affirmatively. On July 4th, the wording was finally amended to everyone's satisfaction and sent to what they called an engrosser. This was the guy who wrote it out on the parchment where the S's look like F's or the F's look like S's. And then they sent it off to the printer. Thousands of copies were made. They were sent by mail and by horseback around the colonies, and there was great jubilation. Liberty had come to the American colonies. It would be 4 long years, however, before the guns would cease and peace would come. Why did these men and women go to all this trouble? Why did they go to all this cost and all this danger? What drove them? What was so important? Americans today cannot imagine the answers to these whys, given our cultural melees. That these people were willing to go to war over taxes. Great Britain had just fought a costly 7 years war. In our country, we called it the French and Indian War. This was the first global conflict involving powerful nations, France and Great Britain, acted out on 2 continents. And to help pay for this war, Great Britain imposed what they called the Sugar Act. This tax included not only sugar, but textiles, coffee, wine, and dyes. It reorganized the American customs system to bring stricter enforcement of British trade laws, establishing a court in Halifax, Nova Scotia, with jurisdiction over the colonies in trade matters. Parliament then passed the Stamp Act, 1765. This covered all printed material and was the first tax to be paid directly to England and not to our own legislators. Next came the Quartering Act, whereby British soldiers could simply require homeowners to put them up and feed them while they were stationed in the colonies. When colonists resisted, England passed the Declaratory Act of 1766, which gave Parliament the power to legislate all laws governing the colonies. These led to outbreaks of civil disobedience between British soldiers and colonists. Then came the Townshend Act of 1767, which imposed new colonial taxes on imports such as paper, tea, glass, lead, and paints, and essentially gave Britain a monopoly on these items in America. This was followed by another groundswell of boycotts, protests, and simmering violence. Hence the Boston Tea Party. On March 5th, 1770, British soldiers fired on the protesting mob, killing 5 and injuring 6. We call it the Boston Massacre. It says 1770. I think it was 1775. That's a typo. The First Continental Congress was then held in September 1774. On April 19, 1775, the shot heard round the world was fired at Lexington Green. War had begun, and yet most colonists were still hopeful of reaching an agreement with Great Britain. At the height of the Revolutionary War, it is estimated not much more than 30% of the colonists favored that war. 30% favored Great Britain. 30% just wanted to be left alone. Does it sound familiar? In August 1775, the king declared that the American subjects were engaged in open and avowed rebellion, establishing a blockade of American ports and declaring American ships to be enemy vessels. This brought Thomas Jefferson to his feet, where he said, "Believe me, sir, There is not in the British Empire a man who more cordially loves a union with Great Britain than I do. But by the God that made me, I will cease to exist before I yield to a connection on such terms as the British Parliament propose. And in this I think I speak the sentiment of America. In October 1775, King George III ordered the enlargement of the Royal Army and Navy. And when this news reached America in January 1776, it propelled the cause of independence and led many colonists to abandon all hopes of reconciliation. Thomas Paine published his Common Sense and sold more than 150,000 copies, stimulating the public debate and support for separation from Great Britain. In May, the Congress learned the king had negotiated treaties with German states to hire mercenaries to fight in America. This action convinced many Americans that England was now treating them as foreigners. When the Second Continental Congress was convened in 1775, it became essentially the government of the United States. It first met in May 1775 and petitioned King George for redress of grievances sent by the First Continental Congress. In June, it established a continental currency and a continental army. In July, it created a post office for the United Colonies. The privateering resolution passed in March 1776 allowed for colonial vessels to arm themselves and defend against the enemies of these united colonies. On May 15, 1776, the Virginia Convention passed a resolution to break from Great Britain, but was convinced to wait to see what the Continental Congress would do. On June 10, 1776, a committee of 5 was given the responsibility for preparing a draft of a Declaration of Independence. That draft was submitted to Congress on June 28, 1776. On July 2nd, after 2 days of wrangling and corrections, the document was approved on July 4th, 1776, and sent to the engrosser and then to the printer. On August 2nd, the delegates took turns signing. John Hancock, president of the Congress, signed first in large letters, as he says, enough for King George to read it without his spectacles. The others signed in order of their geographic location, with New Hampshire signing first and Georgia signing last. Eventually, all the delegates signed except for a few. One, John Dickinson, who held out hope of reconciliation, later admitted it was a mistake. And another, Robert R. Livingston, thought the declaration was premature, but he later signed it. We are here because of the courage, because of the tenacity, because of the vision of these men and others who lost almost everything in this struggle. Men and women who, one, understood the issues, unlike today, and number two, were willing to stand on principle. We are willing to bend, to be pliable, to work together, to absorb and to try to come to some kind of a working agreement with people who want us to go away. People who do not like the United States the way she is organized and would much rather have a more socialist, godless state. These people in 1776 understood the issues and were willing to stand on valuable and important principles. May their tribe increase.